All right. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. Welcome to our discussion. This week, we're going to be talking about the archetype of the inventor and the elements that come along in the hexagram, which is Earth over Thunder. My name is John. Here with me, as always, is Bella. And we're going to be looking at these forces of nature in relationship to lunar alchemy as it corresponds to our own evolutionary journey. So thank you for joining us. Nice to see new faces and familiar faces here in the group. Some of our solar members, I think, aren't quite able to be here during the discussions yet. However, all of our discussions are recorded and available for them at a different time. So I'm really excited about this one. It's Gene Key 24. And partly because that's my design Mercury, but also because this gene key always reminds me of a particular archetype in our modern day world that I see through the jazz musician, which is a direction that I went in earlier on in my life. I believe partly to explore this particular archetype, which is all about the invention or the creation of original pathways for a new life to follow. So this particular gene key is kind of close to my heart in terms of the life direction that I grew up as a child being enamored with and excited about and dedicated to. So I'm interested to see where our discussion takes this today, Bella. I wanted to kind of start off, of course, Gene Key 24 looks at the shadow of addiction and the gift of invention, which naturally we can associate with the archetype of the inventor, but then it moves to the city of silence. And Bella, I wondered if you might bring these three qualities that, to me, when I think of silence, invention, and addiction, there's almost no relationship between these qualities and how we experience it on the ground level. Like the human being level, like drug addiction. Is that what we're talking about? Is an invention all about, getting patents for my new Tesla coil that I invented, which of course wouldn't be a new invention. And then what about the city of silence? Are we talking about just not talking? What's going on with all of these and this archetype of the inventor?
Yeah, for me, it boils down to experiencing ourselves in our essence. So I often speak about that middle pillar that we have through the body graph, for example, where we have the 24. We also have the next hexagram, the 2. So they're both in this Kundalini life force channel. And for me, the addictions is everything that brings us away from that experience of that life force through our own unique vessel. And for me, because it is mutative energy in the individual circuitry in the middle of the body graph, invention, it's mutative. It's that spark of something new. In the I Ching, it is about returning, but it's also, we can look at it as planting. So there is something new that is seeded in the gift frequency. And then the highest frequency, for me, it's actually the purity of it, because when you're completely in tune with your essence, with this mutative energy that's always flowing through you, that's a very alive silence. There is nothing interfering with that. And we're not really supposed to, not for long periods of time, we're not supposed to be in that. We have glimpses of it. So glimpses of non-interference and being completely in our own life force, in our own essence. So for me, that's how I would speak around those different words as connecting them to this kind of energy that we have in the 24.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned interference, the shadow of gene key 44, the programming partner, because, you know, in my opening remarks, jazz musicians, what is their entire purpose? Invention within a context of teamwork, the two gifts, 24 and 44, working together. Really a magical combination. Now, maybe jazz isn't your cup of tea, but anyone who listens to that music knows that one of the most exciting possibilities within the context of that style of music is the spontaneous creation of something completely original that has never occurred before. And for me, I had a very deep desire to be connected with that degree of discovery. And that word interference, it really struck me before while I was thinking about this gene key. I wasn't thinking about the 44 and the shadow of interference in any way. I was thinking about the cycles that are described, the cycles of thought, the cycles of feeling, and the cycles of behaviors that we engage in because of the way that our physical body relates with the business of survival. You know, our thought patterns tend to stay in familiar and comfortable, what I might call a rut, you know, this sort of like defined pathway that doesn't really do anything to expand our experience, but it does prevent us from experiencing or having an awareness of any inherent suffering that is available to us. And when I think about this idea of, okay, we're looking at an experience of a lunar body, which is programmed and designed for the sake of survival. And because of that design, we inherently avoid that sacred primal wound that we come into the world with. And when we talk about raising our frequency, we have to break these thought, feeling, and behavior cycles that we've generated and become somewhat restricted by or limited by. And one of the most effective ways to break behavioral cycles, for anybody that's studied some form of behavioral psychology or how to train your dog or something like that, one of the best tools that we have is interference. When you become aware of a pattern that's going on, whether that's outside you or inside you, one of the best ways that you can shift that pattern is to interfere with it. And I think it's really interesting that here's a circumstance where is it possible that the shadow of a programming partner actually assists us in the potential to raise our frequency within its partner? And I don't know that we see that quite as obviously in very many other groups of programming partners. So Bella, I wonder about, you know, this archetype of the inventor. How do you see this shadow frequency of interference either sort of moving this potential for invention forward, holding it back, or what's the quality of this archetype that allows us to take advantage of the potential of these gaps that exist within every cycle that we experience?
We can go back to the qualities of the elemental trigrams. We have thunder and we have earth, and we have thunder beneath Earth. So it's like that thunder that is inside of Earth, we could say. And we have the shadow frequency of agitation and of being lost, and that's how it feels in the low frequency. But then it's all about returning or seeding something that is more, that is a higher frequency, or that is more constructive. So I'm just going to bring it up because it's good to have to just see this, thunder within the earth. And we see that it has, this is the 51, agitation, initiative, awakening. It has the second gene key, dislocation, orientation, and unity. And you can see that, why are we speaking about that? Well, earth is what makes up the second gene key. Thunder is what makes up the 51. So we can see how the 24 is a combination of those two energies. So yeah, it's nice to hear. So I'm actually going to mute myself and let you kind of continue.
Yeah, so I wonder if you might spend just another moment on that picture. This phrase, new life springs forward from the depths. When reading about this gene key 24, if you've done that recently or you're intimately familiar with it because it's part of your profile or something, there are various points in this gene key's journey where that primal wound really comes to the fore, like you can't ignore it anymore. And while I think with this particular gene key, that influence is somewhat subtle, it's not all about that sacred wound. However, without the embrace of it, there's no space for invention or new possibilities. And in the I Ching, this particular hexagram, it was associated with the winter solstice because it's a moment when the new light begins to expand after a period of increasing darkness. In the movement of the hexagrams from one to the next, you can see the movement of strong lines upwards. And sometimes what happens is, as those strong lines move up through each line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they eventually move out and beyond into the next stage of change that's going to occur. And from beneath, sometimes there's a weakening of those lines. So in this particular hexagram, what we imagine existed just prior to this particular hexagram is the 23, which is flipped over with the strong line on the top and all of the weak lines beneath it. And that strong line has moved up and out and was then nothing but earth over earth, just the two. And in that's a complete moving inward, like coming into the womb of the earth, and a downward movement, moving into darkness and receding into a deeper place. And then here, just after the winter solstice, suddenly light is returning, and the strong line is the light, and it begins at the bottom and comes in from beneath. And so it's this idea of life force, the electrical force of life, the lightning that exists that creates thunder as an acoustical presence that suddenly comes forth in this like almost infantile state where it's not ready to burst forth yet, but it's just barely present and needs a great deal of nurturing. I think it's really interesting that the archetype that we just came out of is called the nourisher. And here we are in the inventor. And that little light that's so deep beneath the earth, within our physical bodies, it's deep inside us, deep inside our cells, deep inside our DNA. And in order to access that invention, that light of our being, we can no longer run those habitual cycles. We have to embrace the silence that exists within the gap. And when that happens, what in this particular phase, we have invention is orienting initiative, and that light is the initiative. And the orientation of it is the embracing of that gap in the behavioral, feeling, or mental cycle. So anytime we come into an awareness of a cycle, whether it's a thought pattern that we've thought a million times, or a feeling that we have in a relationship where our partner or our coworker triggers a feeling in us that makes us feel a certain way, that we're familiar with, there's always going to be a gap somewhere within this cycle of experience. And if we're able to fully embrace that, the deeper we can embrace it, the closer and closer we're going to come to that essence of invention. And when we think about that seed, that light that's just underneath the earth, it needs all of this nurturing and all of this nourishing to be created and to have the opportunity to burst forth in the life of spring that's coming. At this time right now in our Northern Hemisphere seasonal experience, we have to be willing to fully embrace this sacred wound, which is really that nurturing ground that allows something new to come through us into the world. So I don't know why, Bella, for some reason, I always, in our discussions, I love when we look at these levels of the I Ching, because somehow I feel like in the discussion of the gene keys, it can be very easy to lose track of the elements. I mean, we were having a discussion about this very thing. I was looking at this gene key going like, man, this is all about like thought patterns and what's going on in our larger mind, which both includes our mental and emotional experiences. And your suggestion to me was, here, look at this level of the I Ching and how it's talking about the seeding and the nurturing of that seed, and what does all of that mean? It really felt like it brought a new kind of viewpoint to what I was getting from what's written about in the gene key, a new like depth to the understanding. And I know you've had a lot of experience with that over the years as you've been both exploring and teaching the gene keys and human design and the rest. And I wonder if in the context of that, you have an experience of, what is your relationship to this presence of invention? Do you see it in the people that you learn from, and how do you recognize that? Does it happen through you in a conscious way, or is it something that, for me, I never know when it's going to come. But when it does, I always recognize it like immediately as soon as it's here. So I wonder if you might just talk about that experience of invention from your perspective.
Yeah, going back to that mutative force, it's not like we can never program mutation. It happens, and many times things are going to be the same and the same and the same, and then one time they are different, and that is individual circuitry again. So somehow I start to believe that the silence here is in a way in the simplicity, because it is, I loved what you and I were doing last night with the elements, and to see how it is earth, and it's almost earth over earth, because that's what's coming after, but it has that yang line. And the way you spoke to it now, it's, for me, that is music to my ears, to be able to just tune into that as you are speaking to it. And at the same time, there is something here that is really simple, where you kind of go into silence. It is this mutative force. And we look at the chakra pillar, it comes in as an inspiration in the head center in the 61. And then, the further down it gets into that little pillar, the more individuated it is, until it comes in down to that 60, that kind of container of our being, that seat of the electricity, we could say, or that muscle of the perineum and the body and the kundalini. So somehow, yes, it's an inspiration that is on its way back to a more individuated expression and experience.
Yeah, like thinking about the way inspiration happens through our mechanics. When I think about what is frequency? Frequency is nothing but the number of times a thing occurs in a span of time. So if you look at our sine wave frequency model in science, it's how many times does it go up and down within a period of time? That's all that frequency is. How many times do we go around on the merry-go-round? How many times do we run around a track, or do we, wake up and do the same routines, brushing our teeth, having breakfast, and going to work? Many of the ancient wisdom practices, the yogis, the Buddhist followers that engaged in meditation and these different practices, began to identify these cycles in increasing detail, to the degree of recognizing, for instance, the number of breaths that any being will take within the span of a lifetime. And I don't remember what that number is, but I remember coming across writings of a yogic tradition that recognize that what is the reason for the differences in lifespan between a dog and a human being? Well, dogs breathe faster than humans. If a human tried to pant like a dog for your entire life, and you were able to replace your unconscious breathing while you were sleeping, and you did the thing like your dog does, you would have a similar lifespan as your Labrador or your, German Shepherd or whatever, because you would take the number of breaths. Likewise, we look at something like a turtle that can live to be 150 years old or something and go like, why does the turtle live for so long? Well, we don't always recognize that turtles can spend like an hour underwater without taking a breath. They take one breath an hour. If a human being does that, the yogic sciences tell us that your entire physical system will be fully rejuvenated at a birthing level of cellular health. So, like these cycles that exist in our experience, and the way that we engage with frequency when we look at the mechanics and how our relationship is kind of built through that vibration that happens deep inside us. You know, how centered do we feel? And based on that degree of inner resonance, do we notice that we have a greater awareness of these cycles? Are we paying deeper attention to our breathing patterns, to our speaking patterns, to our thought patterns? And it really feels like somehow maybe there's some way of tuning into this like central pillar that just allows us to keep expanding in this awareness. And I don't know if you've looked at this before, Bella, but I wonder if, and I don't know if it relates to one of the gene keys particularly that goes down that central column, but do you find that primal sacred wound more accessible through that central column somehow than we might say on the peripheries in the spleen or this solar plexus, or even just the sides of our throat? I wonder if maybe you might shine a little light on that, because I feel somehow that finding that silence, that experience of silence, has to do with our capability of our presence with that sacred wound in silence, in without reaction, need for reaction, or a need for repression. You know, it's like this is one of those shadows that is so incredibly prevalent across the planet, you know, not drug addiction, but the addiction to our own cycles and patterns. So I wonder what you see in that way.
Yeah, I love this inquiry, because for this particular hexagram, I feel like the geometry is there wherever we look. So if you look, like we were saying in the hexagram, you're going to have those open lines. So you have to go all the way until the bottom. It's only the bottom that has that yang line. So you have to keep returning inwards, inwards, inwards. And when we're looking in the body graph, it is inwards in that middle pillar. And then when you speak about the core, you know, the core is the very core, and it's the middle, it's the inwards. So all these for me go hand in hand. And it almost feels like, I don't know why I get stem cells, but you know, in our essence, there is the imprint of everything. And in that first cell, before it had made many cells of it, the core wound that we came here as a soul to work with was already there in the first cell before, in the core cell before it had duplicated. So definitely when we come back to the essence, we have an opportunity to feel that inner imprint, that essence. And I believe that is the place to return to. And we can go outwards, we can get lost, we can get distracted, we can go into interference. But at the end of the day, the way to go back is to the core, because that's what we signed up for. And, you know, I think that you were speaking about how different animals live their life and kind of how long it takes to take that number of breath in a way that we have. And I feel it's similar. The way back to the core can be a serpentine way, or it can be something that is more like a continuous returning with a little bit less of serpentines. And there's no right and wrong. Who says that it's better to be a turtle than to be a dog, right?
Right.
But it's really that geometry that we're looking at. And just knowing that what we're doing with that 24 is we're coming back into essence. And then at some point, because it's mutative, something is going to spark, something new is going to be felt, be experienced. And we all know that with the core. You know, we have the two sides of the coin, the vocation and the core. They are the same. And I feel like when we are also that kind of image, like when we are going out, like you say, in this into the sides, the way that the knot is, it's like we are pulling it to the sides, it gets harder and harder. And the more we come into the core, the more it can actually start to kind of wiggle its way open. So that is also why being right there and then, as the work is happening in a way. And that's very much what those hexagrams that have a lot of yin line is, the yielding of the knot, you know, with the 2 that comes after, and here the 24 is the yielding to that depth. It is receiving realization. You know, if we want to speak again in the geometry of the hexagrams, the trigrams, it is receiving realization. Because the realization is the 51 and the receiving is the 2. So receiving realization through returning back to the essence, returning back to the core, returning back to the inner pillar, inner mutative force.
Yeah, that really, when you're talking about that yielding, it's like there's a vibration that I have become familiar with, and I'm sure that everybody here has some familiarity with it in your own life, where within this addiction shadow of this particular archetype, you know, some of us tend towards the repressive, some of us tend towards the reactive, and almost all of us have some of both going on. And I've always tended more on the repressive side of this particular one, which basically means that I'm unwilling to feel the experience. And that word yielding, not so much for me surrender, because surrender brings in some qualities of like power dynamics somehow that in our mental form, I feel like that kind of obscures it. But there's an emotional presence that exists as an emanation of that singular cell that was that primal cell of our being, right? That carries that sacred wound. And that emotional emanation is something that, in order to embrace that reality that we are, we must yield to. And in the reactionary stage of the anxious activity, which attempts to gloss over the experience of the feeling through activity and kind of avoiding, you know, rather than numbing out, just like being active and trying to feel anything besides that wound. You know, it's like you're being chased by this emotional emanation that's coming from that original cell, and you're trying to outrun it with activity. And the way to return to that essential aspect of self is to yield that race, to stop trying to outrun it, and to allow yourself to feel the experience of the suffering. And for me, that choice, the awareness that allows for that choice, it feels like this extraordinarily sacred and poignant moment that most people, I feel like, only gain access to from an external experience a limited handful of times. You know, that experience of yielding, of being overcome by the intensity of a feeling. You know, some people describe that at the birth of their children. There's many other opportunities for this in the external world, but here we are looking at the gene keys and exploring the archetypes and asking ourselves the question, like, is this available to me in this moment right now, regardless of the external? And if I'm not in the vicinity of that feeling, how do I get there? How can I how can I allow, and this is all such an, to me, it's so funny because like, this isn't even the activity of the inventor. This archetype is what happens when we do this move. Invention just like bursts forth from within, and the realization happens almost without participation, the insight. And so I don't know, Bella, I sort of always, I don't know if this was always present for you, but I kind of always have assumed that there was some moment in your experience where some insight dawned on you on the path that you were following. I know that in the past you were involved in business primarily, at least in terms of your occupation, but something happened that like moved you into these deeper realms. And I wonder if there was some kind of insight that dawned on you that felt like, oh, here's where we're going now.
I'm not sure why I'm taking back to this experience. It happened in Ibiza in 2018, I think. It was a Temple Arts training. And I remember, I never remember any other time in my life where I cried so inconsolably. It felt like the thunder of the earth. And it was something that was actually transpersonal. It was beyond me. And I actually had to die to the same thing twice. And I have written about this. I found like every year in my Facebook memories, it comes up because I had to yield, or I had to die once to the personal experience and once to the transpersonal experience. And I believe that I'm writing about this as the first gene key for some reason, which is also in this middle pillar. And for me, that was a realization, because I felt like I had cried and cried and cried and cried. I don't know for how many hours I sat there. It was like a temple floor, and I was sitting there, and it was Ibiza, so it was not cold from the beginning. So I was sitting in not a lot of clothes, and then somebody came and put something around me, and I was sitting there shaking. I don't know if I was cold or if it was just for crying for hours. And then something was like soothing me. And then I had to do it one more time, like to the universality of the same process, you know? And in that, for me, there was a realization of the spirals of, you know, of everything. And I guess that's what I always speak about. But you can always, I had to thread it in the depth of my being, in the thunder of the earth the first time. And then I had to do it again with, again, like I often say, like more love and more expansion and even more yielding. I had to do it for the whole, you know? So for me, and this is again, I mean, I'm holding the two as my life's work and my design Chiron. So somehow I guess that I am bringing this 24 very much into the earth, maybe very much into the quarter of civilization, where it's about form. I have realizations all the time. Like I have the 11 twice in an open ajna. Like I have so many ideas and so many eurekas and so many aha moments all the time. But there is something here, but that to do justice to this key, I really want to speak to it. Because for me, even if it's like neocortex in the way that Richard speaks about it, like the neocortex, like I just feel, you know, it's kind of zone, like a reflexology, like you have all the points on the foot or something, but it's like, it's all connected. And this is much more than just being something that happens in our mind. I don't feel like the 24 want us to reduce it to something that's happened up in the air. It's really happening in the depth when you dare to return back in. And even if you have to do it one more time with more love, with more wisdom, with more volcano, you do it one more time, because that's the process of receiving realization through you, you know.
Yeah, I love your example so much in relationship to this gene key, because for anyone who's explored their own depth of feeling, of suffering in some form, you may be familiar with a sadness that, as you said, is inconsolable. And when I've gone through a process of teaching awareness around emotional experience and how to transmute emotional experience, that inconsolable emotion is a cycle. It's just a circle that happens over and over again. And there's no amount of expression of that emotion that is going to change that cycle. It's that moment of the gap of acceptance of that silence. And that's where you come into that spiral, and all of a sudden, everything inside just transforms. I love the discussion going on, everyone. Some of the questions, I know, Natalie, at one moment you brought up a question about feeling lost and how that might relate, and considering, oh, maybe that's a form of silence. And I love a realization like that, because any form of experience that we have, whether it's being lost or knowing exactly where we are, feeling found, for instance, in terms of the exploration that's going on with Bella's new creation that's happening. There are cycles occurring and spirals occurring. There's neither just one or the other, but we can always have the capacity to relate to our experience through a cyclical nature, meaning we're just going to keep walking the same path at a later time. The circumstances may change, but it's going to be the same movement, the same thoughts, the same feelings. And the opportunity for moving into a stage of a spiral really transforms the experience that you have. So bringing an awareness of saying, oh, maybe silence is the key to what I'm experiencing when I feel lost. That's a stage of spiraling. No matter the rightness or accuracy of an experience, everything that we experience is relative. So there's no definitions. There's no one way to do something. So I think that's really a fantastic example of a stage of experiencing cycles, being lost, and a stage of shifting into a spiral, something that is inherently inventive. Maybe feeling lost is just my access to silence. That's a brand new thought, an original thought, and is something that I believe arises directly from this particular archetype.
Yeah, I have two things. One in response to that, which again brings me to Richard, actually, and this morning he was speaking about, when I was listening to it, he was speaking about shadow as a compost. A compost becomes something really fertile, but it's kind of where you put so many things that seems like not so, like they seem like it's garbage, right? It's what's left over. And for me, because I have the second gene key as my life's work, lost is the shadow frequency, and knowing how fertile it is to be lost, because it starts that spiral orientation in the moment. And I think that natural movement cannot really move in any other way than in those spirals. That is the movement of, I believe, how the universe expands. And the other thing could lead us down to complete rabbit hole, so I won't go there. And I don't even know who it is, because I don't see the name in the chat, but it says addiction to suffering is very familiar. And what I feel like responsible in a way to say that I don't believe that addiction to suffering really exists. I believe that the understanding that we have is always that whatever we engage in is the lesser suffering, you know. So if we are in an addictive pattern, it is that we believe that in some way that is less bad or less painful than this, you know. And we can take those examples, whether it is anorexia or cutting ourselves, like there is something that feels worse than that. So that's what we're doing. So I don't like to speak about autoimmune disease even, because I think that there is something, when we say that to the body, it means the body is wrong. That when we say this about addiction, it means that the mind is wrong. I don't like to make wrong the being. I like to see the beauty of the being and the coping mechanism of the being, the body and the mind. But it just felt important for me to say, you know, I think that there is something beyond, or there's a little bit to scrape that statement, you know, because that maybe lead us to places again where we can orient and where it doesn't feel so stuck. Because if I'm addicted to suffering, then I might just as well throw the towel and give up, you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways that our minds form our awareness, the structure of the words that we use and the meaning that we have attached to them can lead our experience into certain degrees of perception. And the ability to allow a new frequency for that perception, you know, if we experience addiction to a particular field of experience, whether it's suffering or a mental pattern or a particular feeling. You know, a lot of people who experience a lot of low frequency in their romantic relationships often experience feeling addicted to the emotional patterns, the conflict. You know, that just opens the door to all of the shadows of all of the gene keys, you know, and reframing that perception into these are just cycles of experience that are serving a purpose, like a particularly positive purpose for my own evolution, you know, whether it's a movement of the physical health or a movement of the mind or a movement of our feelings. It's all about the expansion of our consciousness. And that's what we're looking to do with the quantum elemental transmissions that I think we should probably open up for our next moment here with Lunar Alchemy. While I was considering this, I got really stuck for quite a while on the air element because of how entrenched our mental cycles are in terms of the human experience and what a huge impact it has upon our perception. And what I began finally to realize with more contemplation and reflection from Bella and just going deeper into it is that lightning, that light from the thunder that is deep beneath the earth is an inherent quality of our being. And how we respond to that light. Do we try to bury that light? Because that light carries the essence of that sacred wound. Do we bury it? Do we try to get busy with all of the things that we can do on our planet to avoid allowing that light into our experience? So this is an elemental transmission that entrains the potential for our new pathways of electrical life force to open up within our neurologic pathways in the gray matter of the brain, and for the expansion of the actual structural patterns of behavior, of thoughts, of feelings that we experience, so that that archetype of the inventor can bring something brand new into our experience. So, man, yes, thank you for mentioning that, Bella. I think it's probably time for me to begin getting our Lunar Alchemy archetype and element transmissions posted and available as single standalone opportunities. They're only $16. So if you join us for our discussions and there's a particular gene key that you want to focus on, I will get those up and posted in Unlock Your Design and available to you. And since you're already here, you'll receive any information about that, the updates for when those are available. And I think we'll be able to make some special opportunities for you to engage with those as well as we get all of that launched. Currently, we have the majority of the Lunar Alchemy discussions and transmissions that focus primarily on the shadow frequencies. So currently that is what is available, but these archetype and elemental ones we will begin to make available very soon. So really thank you all for joining us in this discussion. And I really appreciate your involvement in the discussion, your presence, and I can really feel the depth of feeling that you together as a group bring to the discussion. And we're looking at a quantum transformative experience here. And, Bella, I don't know if I can speak for you, but in our discussions, I feel a definite increase in access to the depth of our discussion with the addition of everybody who's joining us.
Yeah, and I feel as well for me that I'm taking another role in a way, because when it's just you and me, it's kind of like we are like throwing a ball in a good way. There's dynamism, but because we are in a field of more beings, I feel like I get to kind of sit back and hold the space, and I don't have to be so much in the interaction of normally how fast I am with everything. And sometimes I will be in that fast energy, but it has felt more and more that it's a space kind of holding and feeling the space, and I can like even feel how I'm like moving. So it's definitely a different quality as we are in a group field, even if it's just a discussion. So of course, even that would be even more, I think, present somehow in the transmission. And like I said before, some of us, we prefer to do the transmissions at other times and have it and be in our own space. And some of us really, really benefit from being in the group field and doing them as they are happening. So that's to know your own vessel and how it interacts.
Yeah, I love that, Bella, because your life's work is Gene Key 2, which we're about to come up upon in the upcoming week. And you're describing an inherent quality of that gene key in that holding space. And so we are looking at an opportunity to, because of the solar transit with Gene Key 2, it will actually be completed before we meet next week. We're looking at an opportunity to have a discussion around that live with everyone. So stay tuned for that opportunity. And for now, we will continue with the transmission. So for our solar members, you can just click on the transmission link to join us there. And we will see you all in a future discussion. and continue with the transmission at this time. I'm sending loving presence from my heart to each of yours, and we'll look forward to seeing you and speaking with you again soon. So bye-bye for now, and we'll begin the transmission.